crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with a birthday card featuring a stamp set from My Favorite Things. To get started, I'm using the My Favorite Things Birdie Brown Adorable Elephants stamp set, and as I do my Copic coloring here, I am trying something that's a little bit newer to me. I want to try to make my shadow areas smaller and my highlight area is larger because I think it makes for some more dramatic coloring. And I found that in the past I've been kind of blending things out a little too much. My characters were looking a little bit flatter than I intended. So here I'm going to use the C5 and C3 in very small amounts and make sure that most of my elephant is covered with the C1. These Birdie Brown stamps made that a little bit easy, particularly this elephant that I picked for the card today. As you can see, though, I do tend to stamp like a lot of stamps from the same stamp set, so I can color a bunch at one time. And part of the reason that I like to do this is because I tend to cut things out with my brother's Scan and Cut rather than dies, and so it's easier, or I guess more like save some time to cut a bunch of things at once. So I'm going to, like I said, cover most of the area with the C1, and therefore I think that because there's a lot of extra area in this elephant, it allows those highlights to be those shadows to be a bit more meaningful and add more dimension than if I were to have blended everything out or made my shadow areas bigger. I hope that makes some sense. It might be a helpful tip for some people who feel like maybe they want a bit more dimension in their coloring and they're not quite sure what might be going on. That's just a personal experiment. I did use the C0 in the ear, and if I wanted to make the C1 appear blended more, I actually went in with the C00, because if you add too much of the C1 or your lightest color, then that will, Copic markers layer. They are somewhat translucent and very blendable, but if you add several layers, they get darker. So you don't want to do too many layers of your lightest color. And that's why sometimes it's beneficial to have 4. With the pink areas, I just blended out with, I think it was R83, R00, and R20, but they'll be in the video description. Anyway, this is another thing that I wanted to highlight about this card. I wanted to create a square of ink blending. And I thought that it would be pretty easy to do if I had a stencil. So I decided to make my own homemade stencil. This is like a stencil material that I got at Michael's. It's made by FolkArt, but there's other ones out there, and I'll try to link to something similar that you can get online, but you also can get it in a local store. And you can make your own stencils with your dies. Particularly large dies that don't have too much detail are great for this. I wanted to center it so that this would be something I could use multiple times. And I know that a lot of stamp companies or craft companies make stencils that cut out basic shapes, but we can make a lot of that on our own if we have, circle dies and square dies and things like that. And there might be reasons why you want the one that the craft company makes, but what I thought was an advantage here is I have the exact size that this die, this opening is, and I'm going to take advantage of that later on. I'm doing some really simple ink blending with my Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. I am using a domed blender from scrapbook.com. I do like how that domed gives even less of those harsh lines that the round blender does. So the square or the old rectangle blender left really harsh lines. The circle blender got a little better, but the domed top I really like for your traditional distress blenders, but stencil brushes work excellent as well. I also spritzed a little bit of shimmer over just to add some detail to my sky, because in general I was trying to keep this a pretty clean and simple card. Also, I am working directly on my card base. So this is a 4 1/4 by 11 piece of cardstock folded in half at the 5.5 mark. And here I'm going to heat set this just so I get an idea of what my background is going to look like, and so that I can keep working on the card without fear of smudging things. This here is the MFT tucked in turf Dienamics. and I'm not going to use it in the way that it's meant to. Like all those little tufts of grass, they're actually like cuts in the die so that you can like tuck characters in the grass, which I love. And I'm looking forward to using the die set in that way, but I'm not using it that way today. But having that stencil cut with my dies meant that I could go in with that same die and cut that grass exactly to the size of the square. So I thought that was a nice advantage to making my own stencil. Here I'm just heat embossing my sentiment. I'm going to use white embossing powder. And I'm stamping a sentiment that says happy birthday from the stamp set and stamping it onto some gray cardstock. I have been really liking mixing up my sentiments lately instead of just stamping black on white, which I was doing a lot. I mean, the look of white heat embossing on black is great, but also using different colors of cardstock or different colors of ink. Just like little things I'm trying to do to sort of mix up things that I do a lot. So anyway, here I'm ready to start assembling all of the pieces. There's my die cut grass that perfectly fits the square. I didn't have to measure anything. I just used the same die that I used to create the stencil to create that strip of grass. And then I'm going to overlap this sentiment over the grass. And I am using a little bit of dimension for different elements of the card, like the elephant and the sentiment. And I'm just using some layered up cardstock for that as opposed to foam tape, just because I'm making those scraps anyway. So may as well use them to add a slight bit of dimension. Also just adding a little bit of glitter pen here. Hard to see on camera, but there you go. So that's it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!